for joining us. I know you have an incredibly busy schedule. Thank you so much for sharing with us your vision and your hopes for environmental and climate policy in the state of Colorado. I know you have a lot to talk about, so I just wanted to say thank you. This is one of the most exciting group of people that we have here at the Community Foundation. I hope the work of the EAG will be a model for others around different topics that folks have brought to our attention. And so I just want to say thank you. You guys are an incredible group of folks, and we're just so fortunate to have you in the family. With that, I'll kick it off to our phenomenal board chair, Sue Anderson, to moderate today's conversation.
Well, thanks, Tatiana. I'm a little uncertain about exactly what I'm moderating here, because we only have one of our 5 speakers is actually on board yet at the moment. So, but I'm gonna just talk a little bit about what it is we're doing, and welcome everybody, and hope that I can stall for a minute here and have them all show up. But I will say this, that we did invite 5 legislators to participate, and you just never know what's going to happen, and that's why we invited 5, because one, Senator Fenberg is maybe going to only show up for part of it, because if you saw the news today, the Senate president resigned to go take a job with the Pentagon. So that sort of disrupted his life a little bit. And then Senator Gonzalez, who's on the Judiciary Committee, because it was a snow day yesterday, all of the judiciary bills got shifted to today, and they're still in committee hearings. So just so you know, and I'm not sure where Rep. Valdez and Senator Winter are, but they should be here any minute. But at any rate, welcome to everybody. And I know most people are with the Boulder, the Community Foundation, Boulder County Environmental Affinity Group, but I see a few names that are actually with the Denver Foundation's Peter Kirsch, there you are, with the Denver Foundation's Environmental Affinity Group. So this is a joint event between the 2 groups, and I know that we have more people registered, so I imagine other people will be joining us as well. So certainly, what we're talking about this evening in terms of environmental policy and legislation is it's certainly relevant these days in the context of both climate chaos and what we saw a month ago roar through southern Boulder County. Certainly relevant in terms of what we see around climate change and climate chaos, and also the disinformation and the democracy issues related to that. Certainly relevant in terms of our air quality. Right now in the winter, it's sort of easy to forget about what happened last summer and the air quality issues that we all experienced last summer. So all of that is happening and creates a context of challenges in the public policy arena, and with some of bodies of elected officials, particularly at the federal level, being a little bit less effective than we might want them to be in moving environmental policy forward. It's certainly challenging times. At least at the state level, we have much more opportunities and much more hope in terms of things that can happen at the state level. So, well, I still haven't seen our other presenters show up here yet, but so my plan for this session was to have the legislators talk first about their legislation and what they're proposing, and then move into our questions that people posed when they signed up for this. And there's a bunch of questions that people asked, and then move from there into discussion with folks who are here today. So I think we'll just go ahead and do that. And since Representative McCormick is here, I was going to start with the Senate and move to the representatives, but we'll just start with who's here. So that said, Representative McCormick, you represent northeastern Boulder County, but I know you have some environmental legislation up. So you want to talk a bit about what you're doing and what you're working on and sponsoring or co-sponsoring.
Well, thank you, Sue, very much. And thank you all for the invitation to join you tonight. I was joking. I hope I don't have to cover for the 5 other people that are supposed to be here, because I don't think I'm up to that. But I'm glad to meet you all virtually. And I was planning to actually share a little bit about what we did last session that I'm super proud of, that's so applicable to what's happening today. And also thank you all, each and every one of you that are helping in the fire recovery effort. I know the Community Foundation has just been such an important hub through all of this and will continue to be. So just huge gratitude I want to share with you on that. I am a relatively new legislator from Longmont. I've lived in Longmont for 27 years. My professional background is as a small animal veterinarian. So I bring that experience to this new job. I'm lucky enough to have been moved to the position of being the chair of the Agriculture, Livestock, and Water Committee in the House. Which is a huge honor, and also a lot for me to learn in a hurry as a new legislator. So this is my second session of my first term. I ran for office because of my deep concern of what's happening environmentally, and my 3 adult kids and my concern for their future, and how we as Coloradans can do something concrete to address problems big and small in any way that we can. And you're right when you mentioned that legislation that can happen at the local level, the closer you are to the people, the more impactful it can be and the faster it can happen. So this feels like a pretty good fit for me to be in this position with my background. So last year, I worked really hard, and I think I saw somebody logging on from the Young Farmers, but I'm not sure who that was. But anyway, last year, we worked really hard on a program, a bill that was kind of in the works for over 1.5 years before that. And it was the product of a lot of listening, work, tremendous work that was being done up at CSU through the Colorado Collaborative for Healthy Soils, and very much a bottom-up kind of process, ground up of listening to the agricultural community around the state. Our state is very diverse in its kind of climates and soils and various issues that have to be dealt with water. So this huge conversation was all about soil health and how, and I'm a firm believer on the approach that agriculture and soil can be a huge part of how we address climate change, how we address greenhouse gas emissions, how we address drought and water issues. So looking at the dirt under our feet and how we can better utilize this incredible resource to address many, many problems is critical to me. And so this effort around soil health, the purpose was to come together to find out what the needs were, not only in the agricultural community, but also where there were opportunities to share resources, to share knowledge, to share best practices, to increase productivity for producers, and get to a place where we could start to better measure soil health across our state. So the measuring component of this is critical, Because as we all know, with better data, we can drive better outcomes. The more we learn, the more we can direct ways to solve problems, from soil resiliency to drought resilience. Healthy soil holds more water. Healthy soil with healthy microbes that produces healthy plants can absorb, be better at carbon sequestration. But we need to start measuring these things, and we need to kind of know where things are working better, where there's room for improvement. And so this bill that we went through the process last year, in case anybody's interested and wants to go read the bill, it's House Bill 21-1181. You can access that on the Colorado General Assembly website. But it's a way to have a program that is centralized through the Colorado Department of Agriculture, and then kind of administered through the 76 conservation districts across our state, to provide resources and assistance to those who are looking for help. So it is voluntary. There are many producers and ranchers that are very well versed in this area, have incredible best practices, don't need help, but their knowledge can be shared through the conservation districts that are kind of lacking in that knowledge and don't have the resources to kind of get the word out, don't have the capacity. So the program that came into existence through this bill will create funding for these producers to try new practices that are coming out of the studies through CSU, the collaborative. It will increase the capacity for these conservation and conservancy districts to help more people. Many times funding is a big issue on trying to move things forward. And so having this program that will help share some of this funding across those districts that are in need of help is critically important. It will bring forward new tools for the conservation specialists to support producers. And most importantly, it will expand the ability to test soils. There's already a program in place in Iowa that this will expand and kind of copy here in our state, to have a soil testing that will test more than just mineral content, and lead us to a place where we can really make the best use of healthy soils and try to maximize the health of soils across our state, because it's going to be different for every section across our state. It will build research. So this data that's being collected will be aggregated so that it can drive a statewide inventory to help meet these needs, and help farmers and ranchers see how important their contribution can be towards climate change mitigation, be part of the solution. It's pretty exciting. The farmers and ranchers are very much ready and able to participate in this way. It will create an advisory committee that is comprised of all the people, all the voices and experts in this field. And it was a bipartisan effort that we were able to, through lots and lots of discussion, to get across the finish line and put this program into existence. After that happened, and we found that the state had stimulus money. We found extra money last year. We brought forth another bill, a companion bill to this, that directed funds to create a program not only to jumpstart the soil health program, with $2 million, which is incredible. It started at zero. We were able to get $2 million in there. But what's important about that is we were able to access federal matching funds. There were federal funds available looking for states that had soil health programs in place to direct funds towards those soil health programs, because at the federal level, they also recognize this is important. And so we were able to, I think, pull in $6 million additional dollars into that program just because we put that $2 million in there. So I was pretty excited about that too, because to get a program going and to keep it going, you need money. That same other bill, which is Senate Bill 21235, added $3 million towards the Agriculture Value Added Cash Fund, which directly supports advancing Colorado's renewable energy and energy efficiency programs. So we were able to put a good chunk of money towards that program, which will drive the ability of the agricultural industry towards these energy efficiency programs. Sometimes you'll hear about I forgot what it's called. There's a water, somebody on this call might know, where they can use the energy of water to help with their energy needs on their farms as it flows downhill. There's a certain amount of that money that is going towards the development of agrivoltaic programs. And many of you may be familiar with Jack's Solar Garden south of Longmont. If you're not, it's a great place to go visit. And agrivoltaics are the setup of solar panels where the use of the land underneath the solar panels can be used to grow crops, to potentially graze animals, and to drive the ability of this infrastructure to actually increase productivity of certain crops. And they're doing a lot of measuring and data collecting at Jack's Solar Garden. So there's money that is going out right now to new projects similar to Jack's Solar Garden, which has been such a great model across the state. So I wanted to share with you this great approach. I think there's a lot that can be done, again, in the agricultural space to help us towards the goals that sometimes seem overwhelming. But it is piece by piece, little by little, that we have to attack this very huge challenge that we find ourselves in. So, and I think about the fire, the recent one, and all the ones from 2 summers ago as well. Fire is incredibly damaging on so many levels, but what it does to the soil is devastating. What it creates deep down into the soil and how long it can take that soil to recover. Dirt is not just dirt. It's all those microbes and all those fungi and all that stuff that's just destroyed to ash. And so fire mitigation, fire recovery is part of this, this, like, nothing is an island. It's all interconnected. And
so Representative McCormick, I appreciate all your comments. We now have 2 of our other speakers have joined. So
oh, great.
I want to make sure we create space for them. I did want to add one thing to some of the things you were saying about soil health in terms of a bill that's being proposed this year. The bill is ultimately mostly about pollinators and pesticides, but one piece of it is to create an incentive program to work with farmers to find alternatives to neonicotinoid coated seeds. And neonicotinoids, of course, not only affect pollinators, but they also destroy soil health. And so our hope is that can be part of improving soil health. And I think there's lots of other possibilities in terms of agriculture, and Andy Brighter might know something about that when we get to the discussion part, since Andy's on from the Young Farmers Coalition.
Oh, great.
So I wanted to, I know that Representative Valdez is here somewhere, and I believe Senator Winter is now on. So I think what I'd like to do is pass it to Representative Valdez to talk about any bills that you're working on this year that are environmental bills or follow up from last year's session, or you know, any thoughts you have about things that are happening in the legislature relative to environment that this group should know about. And welcome. Thank you for being with us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's always good to see folks taking an interest in the living world. It is kind of important after all. So thank you for taking some time. I just came from the Energy and Environment Committee in the House, where we just met, and we passed a good microgrid bill, and we ended the run for a bill that was trying to ensure that oil and gas could be installed on all buildings in the future. So we're working on a lot of stuff down at the Capitol this year that's going to be really exciting in the environmental space, especially when it comes to air quality. I think the metro area really got a wake-up call, even though a lot of the visual pollution that folks were seeing was in fact smoke. It brought to people's minds the fact that there are a lot of things that maybe we can't see, and that we can see sometimes, that are very harmful to our health. So we need to be looking at air quality from many perspectives, especially those of us who live in the metro area, which is a major non-attainment zone with ozone. We're in a valley, which I think a lot of people, when you move here, it's not easy to figure out that we're down in the bottom of a bowl. And so we get caught in these inversions in the wintertime, and we really need to be a leader in air quality. So I think this year there's going to be a number of different efforts to look at how do we truly control ozone? How do we address high emitting, not only vehicles, but lawn equipment, things like that, the things that we don't often think of, but they are major offenders when we talk about this. And how do we continue the work that we're doing with electrification, and with vehicle electrification especially? I represent downtown Denver, for those of you who don't know, and it's an area where traffic is constant. The exposure to pollution from vehicles is pervasive. It is serious. It is causing major health concerns for folks that live along I-70, along I-25, and just generally where there's a lot of congestion. So one of the things that I've always championed, and I will continue to champion this year, is that we can talk about vehicle electrification all day long, but I live in downtown Denver, and I can't have an electric vehicle because my building was not designed with enough electrical capacity. So I actually have a bill for that. As you could say, we really need to focus on looking into the future. The buildings that are going to be built need to be built ready for electric vehicles, for people living in apartments, for people living in condominiums, and for multi-tenant buildings as well, where you have business. People need access to electricity to have a real shot at getting electric vehicles to go mainstream. And the other thing that I work on with vehicle electrification is that we just need to improve access. And so Senator Winter and Representative Gray passed a great transportation bill last year. We want that to be implemented because there are funding sources in that bill that will help us to fund programs of accessibility for electric vehicles. I think that's incredibly important, that we continue to build that bridge so that everybody has the opportunity to, access these amazing things when it comes to transportation. It's the future. Let's embrace it now. So air quality, air quality, air quality. We need breathable air. The other thing is wildfire. I mean, we just had a suburban wildfire. It was scary. It should scare us all, because had that wind have kept going, who knows where we would be. Hopefully we have opened some eyes that we have a major climate problem, and we need to be resilient as well. So we are going to be working on a number of different initiatives to make not only our mountain towns more resilient, but how are we going to make our cities more resilient as we face the realities of a planet that is sick? And so we need to do both. We have to aggressively decarbonize our transportation sector still, and we have to look at all of our other resources that we're running out of as part of climate change, and one of them is water. And so I think as urban folks, the other thing I think, and I don't have a bill, but I think that urban folks need to start looking at the water conversation a little more seriously, because there's a lot of us here in the metro area, and it's a much greater problem, I think, in the short term, if we were to run out of water. So we need to be a part of that conversation. So that's kind of an overview of what I'm working on, what I think that we are working on, and we are really anxious to deliver some results on this, because the air quality is really an opportunity, not only for us as environmental activists, but we actually have a lot of support across the aisle, not with our fellow legislators, but with the constituency. Republicans are with us on cleaning up the air. So we need to strike while iron is hot. And I think that we have a great opportunity to do that this year.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Representative Valdez. I hope you'll be able to stick around for the discussion when people, well, I undoubtedly want to ask you questions. Let's see. I believe that Senator Winter is on. Are you on?
I am here.
Great.
Yes.
In your car.
Hello.
Awesome.
I'm in my car.
Well,
I did not
I hope it's an
make it
electric
home.
car.
It's hybrid. So next iteration will be electric, but I did not make it home before being able to call in to you all. But very excited to be here. Excited about all the work you're doing, because ultimately we are only able to do the work that we have support for. And we can only do the work with the teams we build. And so thank you for all being here and pushing for good, strong climate legislation, environmental legislation. This year, I'm working on a couple of things with some great legislators and with you all to address some of the climate things we didn't get done last year. But I just want to say, we did pass historic climate change legislation last year, and it wouldn't have been possible without all of you and all of the work and all of the emails and testimony and organizing and rallies. And so thank you for all of that and helping us pass historic legislation last year. And from my perspective, especially 1266, the Environmental Justice and Climate Bill. This year, I'm working on a couple of things. We know that the #1 carbon emitter, the #1 GHG emitter right now is the transportation sector. And that's hard to figure out, right? Because when we take on the electric sector, the built environment, or oil and gas, there's a couple operators, maybe several dozen operators, but we figure it out. When we're talking about transportation, that's millions of people deciding what they drive every single day, and how they drive and how they commute. And so one of the bills that we're getting ready to introduce is a clean commute bill. So there was a rulemaking earlier this year that got canceled about reducing single occupancy vehicles and reducing vehicle miles traveled, and that rulemaking didn't go forward. But there's things that we can do to make sure that we are meeting our goals. In the governor's roadmap, they call for a 10% reduction in vehicle miles traveled in order to meet our carbon reduction goals. And as Representative Valdez talked about, electrification is a big part of this, but we can't only electrify our way out of this. We have to also reduce vehicle miles traveled. It means more mass transit, more carpooling, more telecommuting. And so what our Clean Commute Bill does is provide tax credits for businesses that are offering different incentives to employees for how to commute in different ways. It's also offering an employee-based incentive so that any benefit they get is pre-tax. And then we're asking large employers, especially in areas that are non-attainment, which Representative Valdez talked about, to make sure that they have an alternative transportation plan. They're letting their employees know how to access alternative transportation, and they're doing a yearly survey. We're also working with the Energy Office to make sure that our own state employees have all the tools that they need and are necessary in order to commute in cleaner ways. So we're really working with our transit agencies, our TMOs, our MPOs to make sure we're reducing those single occupancy vehicles traveled, and that's through our clean commute bill that should be introduced within the next week. And then we know another piece of this, as has been stated before, is air quality. One of the things that we are working very closely with the administration on is free transit during ozone season. So we know we're going to probably be in non-attainment yet again, as we have year after year in many areas in Colorado for ozone levels. And so how about we start offering free transit? This does two things. It reduces vehicle miles traveled, it cleans up the air quality, but also shows folks that it's easy and convenient to take transit and starts changing behavior. So we're bringing a bill to make sure that we're offering free transit during the highest ozone impact days. These two bills, I hope, move us forward in making sure that we are reaching our carbon reduction and greenhouse gas reduction goals within the transportation sector, which is really hard. In addition, I'm bringing legislation to offer transparency on what's in fracking fluid. We had a report released just this week about PFAS and how much PFAS is in Colorado, which is a chemical that never goes away, has very detrimental impacts. And a lot of that comes from oil and gas. And so the first step is to do some transparency within fracking fluid. So those are three bills I'm working on. I'm also working with Representative Burnett on making sure we are measuring and mitigating and modeling small source pollution, which when there's a lot of small source pollution, it can add up to large sources of greenhouse gases. And so we're making sure we're addressing that. I look forward to supporting bills that other colleagues of mine are bringing. So I know that Senator Hansen is working on some climate bills, especially around the built environment and construction materials, because we know that a significant portion of our greenhouse gases also comes from the built environment and what we're building with. And so those are some of the things that we're working on in the Senate. And I look forward to any questions you have. And thanks all for being here. And thank you all for the support you've given important climate legislation in the past. It would not have happened without you. And we're not going to be able to pass climate legislation this year without your help.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Senator Winter. I really appreciate that. I hope you can hang out in your car for a little while longer because, and I think that Senator Fenberg is probably tied up with the leadership issues in the Senate, so he's not here. Maybe he's going to join us. I'm not really sure. So I think the three legislators that we've heard from may be what we have for today. But we do have lots of questions, and a lot when we did ask, just for you all, for your presenters, we asked folks when they registered if they had any questions. So we have a set of pre-questions that people asked when they registered, and then I know people are going to want to ask questions as well when we sort of get through some of those. So I'm going to start with sort of the, I don't know, maybe the easy sort of softball kinds of questions around action. And this is sort of multiple questions rolled into one. So it's multiple parts. So pay attention, I guess, to the multiple parts. So the first part is, what's the most useful thing that we can do? That's I guess, maybe fairly easy. But then, you know, are there things that we can do? I know that since there were challenges last year with Governor Polis threatening to veto climate legislation, and there was just a whole lot of negotiation that went on around that. Are there things that we can do relative to the governor's office? And what kind of, somebody asked, what kind of political cover is especially helpful to lawmakers as they push for, as you push for bold climate policy? And so that's a bunch of different questions that ultimately all boil down to what can we do as constituents, as donors, because this is, both of the environmental affinity groups are groups of donors from each foundation that are particularly concerned with environmental issues and in promoting philanthropy in the environmental sector. So what advocacy groups are you working with that we should be supporting? What things can we do? How can we have influence with other legislators? How can we be most helpful? Whichever one of the three of you wants to go first.
I'll hop in. What I first say when it comes to what we do when it comes to the environment is always work your own sphere of influence as best as you can to make sure that the changes are made there, and then come and help us, because we're trying to do these really amazing these large things. I think we have cover. Like I said, the environment is very popular. I think what we really need is just to have those voices heard at the times when it's most important. Like you said, when we have really important pieces of legislation that are coming and there's a potential that, you know, the governor may not sign them, we need to be telling stories of how important it is to get that done. I think in the political space, everything is important to work together with all of the different stakeholders to bring together a piece of legislation at the end of the day that is workable. And unfortunately, sometimes while it feels like we have to do incrementalism, that's kind of the design that we work within. So I always say the very most important thing to do is just to make sure the people that trust you are with you on this, and that you're kind of recruiting new people to the cause, because there's young people, there's older, it's across the spectrum, and we need to be recruiting to make sure that we show that people who care about these issues are a very broad spectrum, and we mean business. And that's my suggestion, is to just keep building our the folks that are under our umbrella.
Thank you.
I'll jump in and build on that, and I agree with what a lot of Representative Valdez said. It really is about using relationships and building relationships. So build relationships with legislators, build relationships with the administration. I know that many of you called in on Senate Bill 200 last year, and those might have been uncomfortable conversations that you had talking about why Senate Bill 200 was so important and ultimately where we got in 1266. But those one-on-one conversations and those relationships mattered. So making the calls to the folks that you have relationships with are really important. Also, talk to the sponsors of the bills you like. So for example, I represent North Glen, Westminster, and Thornton. I'd imagine a lot of you don't live in North Glen, Westminster, and Thornton, but I'm probably sponsoring bills that you really like. So talk to me and figure out when the best time to get involved in is. I think the best time to get involved in a bill is a week before it's in committee, because committee members haven't actually made their decisions. They're just starting to get the idea that the bill is coming. They're very open to ideas. And especially like Representative Valdez said, is the stories of why this matters to you, why this matters to your business, why this matters to your children, why this matters to you as a person. And so getting involved with the sponsors, because they're going to know who on different committees needs to hear from you, maybe who in leadership needs to hear from you, maybe who in the administration needs to hear from you. So connect with the sponsors of the bills that you care about, because ultimately we're here to build power through people and bring people together. And we do that through storytelling and being organized in a strategic way.
Thank you.
I'll jump in too. So yeah, what Senator Winter and Rep. Valdez said really do ring true. And the personal story and why it matters to you, and how a piece of legislation is going to make your life better or worse in a particular way, is what committee members can hear. So when we just say on a more general level that this is better for our air quality, it's more powerful to hear about your child that has developed severe asthma because of where you live and what they're breathing, and how that affects your monthly cost for medication, and how you have to really check your phone, not just for if it's going to be sunny or snowy, but you have to check the air quality. So really bring it down to a very personal level. We can remember that. We can remember that it makes an impact on us. And Senator Winter is correct about the timing on when voices get raised, and signing up to testify in person or virtually in committee also is a very powerful way, whether you're invited to or not. So many times bills will come in front of a committee, and those that have kind of been working the bills have their list of people that are testifying for or against the bill. But hearing from the public is really critical. It's your right. It's also your responsibility to speak up on those issues that are important to you. You can sign up through the website. You don't have to wait to be asked. You, as a citizen of our state, are allowed to sign up and testify. And in most committees, you'll have 3 minutes to give your story, which doesn't sound like a lot of time, but when you're prepared and ready, it can be a very powerful 3 minutes. So just wanted to echo what everyone else was saying and how important those personal stories are.
Great, thank you all. I'm going to turn to a set of questions that I'm going to sort of again roll into one set. Is that, you know, we certainly are living in a context of attacks on democracy, attacks on voting rights, attacks on I guess just not rather than attack, a sea of disinformation. And that relates to so many different things. I mean, whether it's COVID and vaccines, or whether it's climate change, or you know, the results of the 2020 election. I mean, we all see it. We see it every day. So and you know, in that context, I think it's very hard to work on environmental issues and work on really many issues, because that sort of gets in the way. And without our democracy intact, it's going to be hard to move things forward. So can you each maybe talk about one, how you're dealing with that kind of an environment, but also what are you doing and what can we be doing? It's more, what are you doing to address the disinformation, particularly around environmental issues that we see around us every day? Anybody want to speak to that?
Yeah, I do. I tend to really like to engage folks in a civil, respectful conversation, because when we have these extreme divisions amongst ourselves, it makes it very difficult for anyone to hear anyone else. And so I have been consciously practicing the art of the open-ended question to people, to not start into a conversation trying to convince them how wrong they are, but rather than to ask them, tell me more about why you feel that way, or what has led you to believe that, to help draw them out and have them see how strong or weak their position may be by getting them to talk about it. And I think that's how we can engage people in our own personal circles, as well as those that we work with here down at the Capitol, to try to get away from the megaphone kind of situation where we're just yelling things at each other, and trying to see problems that we can describe in a way that we each see. You know, for instance, on the climate issue, some can't seem to say the words climate change. They just can't seem to accept that there is a human component to climate change. And so sometimes it comes out a little better for them to at least be able to address this. And we're going to see more severe weather events. We're talking about the same thing. It's just the ability to have a conversation, to reframe maybe how it is you say things, sticking with the truth, and then trying to steer them away from the misinformation side or the outright lies, back to let's describe the problem and how we can address it, so that we're kind of getting away from this headlines type of speech.
Thank you. Senator Winter, Representative Valdez, either one?
Yeah, I'll jump in. So right now is a really interesting time. There's a lot of feelings surrounding these things and not a lot of logic. So it's interesting in that respect. So the psychology brain in me says, you have to work with what you're presented with, which is usually a tremendous amount of emotional energy, and bring it back to things that I think we all share, like family and children and things like that. I oftentimes think, as crazy as things have gotten, one of the things that we've lost in this very short period of time was, giving folks a little bit of grace and, trying to ignore some of the more inflammatory parts and getting to the core of the fear that's usually behind this. People are afraid of change. People are afraid of climate change. Those things are equal. And so we just have to find innovative ways to get through those defense mechanisms. And I also would say that COVID has really set human socialization back quite a bit. It took us thousands of years, tens of thousands of years of living together to get along. And, that kind of went away quick when we were locked down. Everyone kind of forgot how to treat each other. So I oftentimes think we just need to take it down a little bit, and then try and go for those things that we all share, which is, we love our family. We want our family to have a good place to live. We all love nature in some way, and we just have to figure out, maybe it's hunting to someone and to you it's something else, but they see it the same way, or fishing. So I always just try to find that thing and just have a conversation about how we both have that interest, because we do share that with them. They just are afraid of the change that it takes to get there. And so that's my advice.
Yeah, I don't have much to add, but it's just starting with where people are at. And that takes listening and understanding their fear, as Representative Valdez said, and understanding their motivations, as Representative McCormick said, right? And listening. And also that's why sharing your story is important, because we can all share facts, but when you share your story, you bring your values to the table. And when they share their story, they bring their values to the table, and you're probably able to connect. So start with where people are at and start with stories. Too often we try to go into facts when we need to bond as humans before we can open our minds and hearts to that.
Well, that's all good interpersonal advice. I think we maybe turn back to the questions around democracy of specific things that you might be able to do to address the attacks on democracy at the state level. But at this point, I do still have some pre-questions, but I think we'll turn to our audience here and see if, remind people, if you have questions, you can either use the chat, or I think we can start using the raise hand format. So raise your Zoom hand if you have a question that you want to ask our esteemed guests, and launch into some discussion here. Anybody? And I can start with one of my questions, which is for all of you. What can you and what are you doing to protect biodiversity in our state? Because I think we know that without biodiversity at all levels, and that's soil health all the way up to our charismatic large animals, what can you be doing, and what are you doing?
That's a great question. It's interesting because today we were talking about, I'm working on a biodiversity resolution similar to the one that Congressman Nagus is working on in Washington, to highlight the issue and to really get the facts out there about not only the crisis that is facing us as humans living in this world right now, but every living thing and we're seeing extinctions, and it's just not a good thing. We're seeing unhealthy everything. And so I would like to see this resolution happen in support of a plan of how we're going to preserve our biodiversity, because as a state we have amazing biodiversity, but as a nation we do, and we need to at every level be looking to protect biodiversity, because that's the scariest thing. That's the blueprint of what goes wrong for pretty much every living thing if we don't start to make changes. We're not somehow gonna get our way out of it. So we really need to have this conversation. It is a little scary. I think sometimes people don't want to be hearing it because it's scary, but you know what? When animals are going extinct, when we have unhealthy everything, I just drove through the Everglades not too long ago, and they're dead. And so we have major problems that we need to first acknowledge, and then get a plan. And that plan has to be a nationwide plan, because Colorado can't save it all. We are downwater, we are upstream, we share these spaces too. So we have to be lobbying for a national biodiversity strategy so we all benefit.
I want to jump in and say that I'm so supportive of, and I think more needs to be done, of looking at how human encroachment on wildlife and the spaces that wildlife needs to survive and to advance. We've really created a problem for many species because of our development. And part of that is certainly, many of you may have heard this week, the CPR story about the wildlife corridors that are so essential to animals to be able to traverse across land to interact with others of their species, to be able to reproduce in a healthy way. And they saw pretty stark evidence of this in Southern California, where they really hemmed in many of the big cats, and they're starting to see severe malformations in those cats' reproductive systems because they've been inbreeding for so long, they cannot get to others of their species. And we've done a pretty good job here in Colorado, but it's an area that we can never feel like we're done. Again, we have to keep collecting data on what kinds of harms we are doing and how do we mitigate that, so that we give wildlife and other species in the animal kingdom the opportunity to thrive and advance, because we've become part of the problem. So I'm very interested to see how transportation dollars that are coming from the federal government, the infrastructure bill, to our state, how we might help keep that in mind as we direct those funds.
Thank you. I'm going to shift over to Mr. Powers, who has his hand up.
Hi. Making headway on environmental issues and all progressive values depend on protecting and preserving democracy. Colorado is the national leading state and model in protecting democracy, and there's a nationwide campaign of intimidation against election workers, especially secretaries of state and especially women secretaries of state, to threaten them. They've received many death threats to keep them from functioning in their jobs. Are you legislators willing to support 3 pieces of legislation? 1, to provide personal security for the 3 statewide office holders, Secretary of State, Attorney General, and State Treasurer, and not require them to appeal when they're denied personal protection. 2, to make threatening election workers, their staffs, families, and volunteers a felony. And 3, provide funding to track and identify the individuals and groups behind the threats, no matter what the form of the threat, in order to be able to catch and charge the perpetrators.
That sounds like a pretty easy ask, John. And why wouldn't any person that believes in our system of government and the ability to maintain this great American experiment want to protect it at all levels? And the disinformation and the lies that are coming out about it's just so flipped on its head that we're hearing this. We're trying to protect democracy by putting forth all these fake audits and attacking the system is literally crazy. So yes, I'd be willing to look at any of those measures. That makes perfect sense to me. And yes, we need to protect the people that have literally put their necks out to maintain our system.
I guess I'll just piggyback off that and say, yeah, in concept, I support all of that. I have been hearing about all of the horrible things that are happening to secretaries of state, not only here, but around the country. And the attacks in Colorado will also be centered on our female Secretary of State when this election cycle comes. That is who they are coming for. They are clear about it. They do not believe in American values when they come to democracy. They're a threat. So just last week, we did a resolution that supported the federal government taking action, because right now, elections are being governed within states and at local levels. That should be great. We can all see with horror what happens when a bunch of fascists get a hold of power. And let's not mix our words. These people are a danger to everything we stand for as Americans and Coloradans. And so let's protect Jenna, like, from the election that's coming up. We need to keep that office. Imagine what they would do with our elections if they got control of the Secretary of State. So that's step 1. And then step 2 is, we're going to have to activate our federal government to act on this. They're the only ones who can step in for states that are doing these sorts of things and fix them. We have no power to do that. And that's the frustration. I think that's why we did a resolution calling upon the federal delegation to make this a priority. It is scary. I never thought I would be talking about this stuff in 2022. This is out. I never thought I would have countrymen who thought this was a good idea. So I said a couple weeks ago, we didn't win these rights easy. and they won't be taken away easy either. And I think that's the mentality we all have to have, and let's keep putting pressure on those who can step into those places where this horrific anti-democratic stuff is happening.
Thank you. Yeah, it is indeed challenging times in that regard. I'm going to go with an easy question here from Jana about what's the best way to keep track of bills?
Probably the same way I do. So often I am heading, I mean, we do have other platforms available to us as legislators, but often I go to the Colorado General Assembly website. And you can search a bill by a keyword, the number, the sponsor. You can search it by House or Senate. So often, or by committee, if you know a bill is going to be in a certain committee next week. So that's often how I do it. There's actually a tab on that site that says bill, search for a bill. And then you can keep track of it under that site. It'll tell you where it is in the process. If it's been introduced, it'll give you a link to actually read the bill straight from there. It'll let you know if it's in committee and what the vote was in committee, or if you're ahead of schedule and you want to sign up for committee to testify. So Rep Valdez, do you have a better way for the public? That's kind of, I think it's a great website and it gets you right where you want to go.
No, it's perfect. And you could listen in there if you don't want to participate as an active witness in committee. You can listen there as well. So you can actually kind of monitor what's going on at the Capitol. And there's the Colorado channel if you want to watch the show. But I put links in the chat for everybody to what Rep McCormick was talking about. She's exactly right. That's the best place.
I'm going to go to a question from Bob Morehouse. How can we get our extensive agricultural lands more involved in carbon capture? And we started the conversation with Rep McCormick talking about agricultural issues, but you want to go
just
further to that?
Yeah, to reiterate and also maybe expand a little bit, they are very interested. They're interested because it's self-serving and it helps us as a planet, and they get that. They really do. They understand that healthy soils drive their production up. They understand that the more carbon we can get in the soil, the better the plants are. The more moisture is retained in the soil. So they are all in, and that's why we had so much support for that soil health program, because there's so many areas where they need help. They want to know which potentially, for instance, which natural or which grazeland grasses might perform better if it's rangeland, which have the higher potential for carbon capture and also higher potential for retaining moisture. And this is why we need to start collecting data so that we can get that information out to these areas. But they are very much interested in partnering in this effort because it's a win-win. And the more we talk about it, the more excited everyone in the area has gotten. What is that film? You guys are going to have to remind me. I'm sure somebody here has seen it. The one about the ground beneath our feet, or is this ringing any bells for anybody? Because I don't think I quite have it right.
Kiss the Ground. It's called
Kiss the Ground. Thank you. That's it. Thank you very much. I highly recommend watching that documentary. It is eye-opening, enlightening, and also inspirational. So Kiss the Ground. Yeah.
Well, just so you know that the Environmental Affinity Group with the Boulder Community Foundation does have a soil health subgroup that is just focused on the kind of work that we can do to address soil health. We've taken tours of a variety of farms over the last few years, and including Jack's agrivoltaics project, which is my next door neighbor. So yeah, we're very concerned about those issues, at least in the Boulder outfit. I don't know if Denver Foundation has a similar group or not. Did you want to jump in there on that question, Rep. Valdez?
No, Rep. McCormick is the one to talk to about soil health.
Okay. Jenny Curtis had a question here. Thoughts on the rights of nature legislation. And I didn't mention earlier that people probably noticed that we did lose Senator Winter. I hope she didn't freeze to death in her car. And I hope we didn't lose her for that reason. But anyway, so it is just the two of you. So any thoughts about the rights of nature legislation that we've seen floated around both at the very local level, but also at the state level to some degree?
And I have to apologize, I am not aware of that. So if someone could please share that with me, or share someplace where I can go read about that, because I do not know what it entails. I like the title, I just don't know what
Jenny,
all
you want
about.
to say something about that?
Well, I'm sure I may not be the most well-versed authority, but Netherlands, for instance, just passed some local mandates. They may not be legally binding, but generally the concept is rivers, soils, air, the animals that we share these landscapes with in Colorado have rights too, and that they should be taken into consideration when any policies or laws or construction or anything that may harm the environment or be good for it. That it's not just about human endeavor and interests. Anyone else have anything else to add on that? It's kind of becoming a slow trend throughout the country, starting very locally. Netherlands is an example. I think it was their city commissioner, or their town commissioners that passed that, and it's just kind of incremental. And I know there's many indigenous communities too who would like to see these types of legislation come up and be adopted broadly.
Actually, Ecuador was a leader in the rights of nature.
Right.
Of course, Ecuador.
There's also, isn't there a green amendment movement that
I've got it on here. What are you watching?
open mic? Anyway, I've heard something about a green amendment, a constitutional amendment that some states have been working on that essentially does what you're saying. It works really well because it covers all levels of government, and that's good in a state like ours where we have local control. There's actually a book about it called The Green Amendment, and I've heard the speaker, the author speak many times, and I want to say New York is the state that's gotten it done. Similar, and I love that concept because constitutional means that it's really in there and that it has to be at every level. So I really like the concept. It's something we couldn't get referred with our majority, so it would have to come as a citizen initiated thing to be a constitutional, but it would pass in the right election. I really believe it, and I believe it would be the greatest constitutional amendment this state has passed in my life, because most of the constitutional amendments that have happened during my time have been awful. And so I always hope that somebody will potentially take up that green amendment to our Constitution, which is where I think it belongs.
Cody, I see you have your hand up.
Yes, I will. I just want to add that we are working on something similar to the concepts that are presented in Kiss the Ground here in Boulder. We have a lot of lands in the arid West that have already been tilled and already been perhaps overgrazed, but certainly affected by our human practices. And post buffalo extinction, the only way we seem to be able to be bringing them back is with the action of ruminants like cows, that when they eat grass and it goes through their several rumens, it becomes very bioavailable to the soil, for promoting diversity in the soil, insect life, plant diversity life, moisture. And but in the arid West, a green amendment would be tricky, because without buffalo and without water, it's not, nature does not heal itself so easily here west of the Mississippi. And so it's a very complex issue. And I know that we need to share, and we've got to share, but we could really affect a lot of our problem by a modification of our agricultural methods that paid more attention to diversity in the soil and in the plant and animal communities in which we're operating, and managing things more holistically. So it's just not a simple question.
It certainly isn't a simple question. If you just look at eastern Boulder County, or much of Boulder County is covered with smooth brome, which is an introduced grass species. So how do we manage our ecosystems with introduced species that have become invasive, even when they were introduced with good intentions? You're absolutely right. It's not easy, and these are complex. These are really complex issues to try and figure out. But I'd like to go back to water quality, because there's certainly some questions in the pre-questions around water quality. Two questions. One is particularly about the Colorado River and the complexity of the Colorado River, which of course does have its headwaters here, and the extreme drought, which we saw resulting in a massive suburban fire, and just the fact that drought and the loss of the river, and the river not making it where it needs to go, and the competition for water in that river. Is there any legislation that's being considered regarding this huge issue? I mean, a lot of this is federal, of course, and it's a multi-state issue, but what's happening here in Colorado? And I would also add to that an additional question about, is there any legislation being considered broadly around incentives for water conservation that you know of being considered to increase our ability to conserve water along the Front Range, especially to maybe possibly avoid some of the transmontane diversions that are continually coming up?
Well, it's almost as if you were listening to my committee meeting this morning. Were you listening? We had a couple hours of presentation by from representatives from the Colorado River District, as well as the Southwest Conservation District, speaking to the issues along the Colorado River and the southwest part of our state, and the extreme challenge that we have as an upper basin state of we have always met our compact agreements for the lower basin states. We have never not been in compliance. The issue has been that we were set up to have, I think it's 7.5 million acre feet for the upper basin and 7.5 million for the lower basin. And we've always supplied the lower basin their 7.5 million. And we've not necessarily used all of what we've been on paper allocated. And the issue is that water on paper is not the same thing as water in reality. And there is less and less water to split in half when we're not using 50-50 equations anymore. We're still obligated to that 7.5 million to the lower basin states, when the lower basin states aren't doing enough to conserve on that end. And that puts us in a bind because we're a headwater state, and our storage is at the bottom of the hill for us, whereas for them, it's at the top of the hill. And that makes a big difference in how we try to manage conservation and storage. So I'm not necessarily answering your question, but there was a lot of discussion on what can be done. How do we look at all the states involved in the upper and lower basin and have more participation in solving the problem as a whole. It's not up to just Colorado to address this, but there is discussion across the river basins in our state. The roundtables that were set up, I can't remember what year it was, maybe 2006. And they're coming up on kind of re-looking at what was agreed upon 14, 15 years ago, and what needs to be done moving forward. We have more and more people coming into our state. I think we're expected to double yet again in 2050. One of the presenters put it as we have more and more straws going into a glass of water that's already has less and less water in it, and we're all pulling from it. We have got to do every little and big thing that we can to address this. And one of the things that came up today and that's been in discussion is looking at every single water use across our state. Agricultural water use is just ultimate need for feeding our nation, and it's such a huge $47 billion economic driver of our state. And the recreational uses, the municipal uses, looking at those non-essential turf and landscape uses is a big part of this discussion. Changing the mindset of what makes a beautiful yard or landscape has got to be part of this discussion. I learned today that 50% of the water that comes into Denver, that comes out of the tap in Denver, comes from the Western Slope, 50%. And so making sure that we are talking about water all the time, we're educating our youth in school that the importance of water and how it's not necessarily a forever resource, and how do we plan. It is a very complicated issue, but the discussion has been raised to a higher level, I think, and it's going to continue to be so. There is a bill coming forward out of the Water Resources Review Committee that I was on this summer that will specifically address the overappropriation, overuse in the northeast part of our state, the Republican River, as well as in the San Luis Valley, and the aquifer storage down there, which has been depleted to a level that's critical to help to help pay water users to stop using water, which costs them money, costs economically for farmers to stop farming, is a big ask. And in the northeast part of the state, they're doing it voluntarily. They've collect money on their own, but they need money from the state to help with this project, and we have to help them. This is a bill that has bipartisan support. It's critically important. It's one that you could certainly all get behind and support. It's a way for us to fix a problem that we caused and that we need to fix. And so I can just let you know that a lot is being done, a lot is being looked at. The the discussions will continue, and I'll certainly keep you posted on new updates, but this is on everybody's mind, and
You
a
know,
lot of smart people are working on it.
I do want to mention one bill, and maybe Rep. Valdez is going to mention that the same thing before he has to leave. I know he has to leave. So
I was just going to mention that I had a meeting with Secretary Haaland, Secretary of the Interior, a few weeks ago about the water issue, which is interesting because I don't work on it very often. But the two things that I would say is Denver owns a lot of water and needs to be a part of this conversation for that reason. The Colorado Rivershed is Denver water, and that I think needs to change. I think, and I'm not trying to be mean to our rural friends and our agriculture friends, but humans are the most important use at the end of the day. So we need to make sure that urban folks have a voice at the water table, and there aren't a whole lot of representatives from the urban corridor that do that. But what we talked about was the energy implications and the fact that there really is no incentive for our folks to conserve. They don't get credit for water that's being sent down to be stored at Lake Powell, where they're going to run this summer below their turbine line, apparently, which is a huge crisis. So this has to be solved. It has to be solved here too, because we have Douglas County drinking out of Denver's aquifer. So we have all sorts of issues that are going to need to happen with water. And I really hope that we get some water experts from the urban corridor as well, because we know we have some amazing folks on the ag side that really get water issues and understand it better than I ever will. But we have to work together, like Rep. McCormick said, to ensure we don't run out of water. And I do have to jump. I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, we're really out of time. I wanted to very quickly mention one bill that I understand is coming, which is a turf removal bill to incentivize removal of turf, to speak to Rep. McCormick's point about green yards and turf, that turf is in a very high user of water. But I don't believe that's been introduced yet, but I do believe it's coming at a very hyper local level. But at any rate, I know that you both have to leave, and I'm sure you need some kind of a break before your next meeting at 7. So thank you both for hanging in here through the entire session, and thanks to everyone from both the Denver and the Boulder Community Foundations. We appreciate you all in both groups. And if folks want to hang out and chat a little bit longer, I think we can, but I want to make sure that Reps McCormick and Valdez feel free to leave.
Keep up the good work.
I know you got another meeting.
Yeah, thank you for the
Thank you.
invitation. I really appreciate it.
So thank you all.
Thanks for coming, everyone. Sue, thank you. Cody, thanks for planning.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.
I think Cody left.
She did.
Yeah,
We'll thank her another time.
yeah,
Bye,
really.
Gerhard.
Bye.
Hi.
Hi, John Backlund. It's nice to see my Conservation Colorado former board members and colleagues kicking
Right.
around. So, well, I'm sorry that our other legislators didn't make it, but you know how that is.
Yeah.
Hi, John.
Oh,
Nope, he's gone. All right. Well,
People out. Sorry.
did you kick him out?
oh,
Yeah.
Hannah, do you want to stop recording?